I wouldn't be telling this story if I didn't think it mattered. If I thought it was just another bad dream or a trick of my tired mind, I'd have let it go. But I can't, because I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it was, it saw me too. It started a few months ago, though I can't say exactly when. There wasn't a single defining moment when I realized something was wrong. It was gradual, creeping, the way a shadow stretches across the ground as the sun sets. One day, you don't notice it. The next, it's everywhere. I moved into this apartment building last year, an old 6-story brick complex just outside the city. The kind of place that had charm, if you ignored the peeling wallpaper and the way the lights flickered in the hallways. It wasn't perfect, but the rent was low, and for someone like me, just out of college, drowning in student loans, it was good enough. The hallway outside my apartment was long and narrow, lined with doors that all looked the same. Dull brown wood, brass peepholes that probably hadn't been cleaned in decades. There was a musty, slightly sour smell in the air, the kind that old buildings always have, a mix of dust, dampness, and something indefinably stale. At the very end of the hall, past the last apartment, was a window. It was the only source of natural light in the hallway, though it didn't do much. Most days, it was smudged with grime, letting in just enough light to cast strange, distorted shadows against the walls. And that's where I first noticed it. Or rather him. I say him because that's what I assumed at first. A man standing at the end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of the dim yellow light. He was always facing away from me, staring out the dirty window. I didn't think much of it first. There were plenty of tenants in the building, and maybe he just liked standing there. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or just lost in thought. The first few times I saw him, I didn't even slow down. But then it started to bother me, because he was always there. Morning, afternoon, night, it didn't matter when I left or when I came home. Whenever I walked down that hall, he was there, motionless, his back to me, staring out the window. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence, that I just happened to catch him at the same times each day. But eventually, I started testing it. I leave my apartment at random hours, even in the middle of the night, just to see if he was there. And he always was. Never moving, never turning, just standing, watching. I told myself he was just another tenant, maybe someone with insomnia or a habit of pacing the halls. But deep down, something about him unsettled me. It wasn't just that he was always there. It was the way he stood, perfectly still, his posture too rigid, too unnatural. It was the way the dim hallway light never seemed to reach him, as if he existed just outside of it, in a pocket of darkness all his own. One night, I finally worked up the nerve to speak to him. I had just come back from a late shift at work, the hallway eerily silent except for the faint hum of the building's old heating system. He was there, of course, his silhouette outlined against the window's dirty glass. I clear my throat, try to sound casual. "Hey man, you okay?" No response. I took a few cautious steps closer. "Do you live here?" Nothing. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way. I felt a cold trickle of unease run down my spine. My mouth was dry. I swallowed hard. "You need help or something?" Silence. A long, suffocating silence. And then a shift. Not a movement exactly. More like a change in presence. The air around him seemed to distort, as if the space itself was bending, warping. I stepped back instinctively, my heart pounding. Then, without a sound, he turned. Not gradually, not naturally. 1 second, he was facing the window. The next, He was facing me. My breath caught in my throat. His face, no, not his face, because there was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin like a mannequin's. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt something, a pressure, a presence, press against my chest, pushing into my lungs, squeezing the air out of me. My vision swam, and then, just as suddenly, it was over. The hallway was empty. The man was gone. I gasped, stumbling backward, my hands shaking. I spun in a circle, expecting to see him further down the hall, but there was nothing. I was alone, or at least I should have been, because in the silence, I heard something. A whisper, soft, distant like a breath against my ear. I ran. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, the door locked behind me, my back pressed against the wood. My heart was hammering so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I told myself it was a hallucination, that I was overtired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew better. I knew that whatever was at the end of the hall, it wasn't human, and it wasn't gone. It was waiting, and it knew I had seen it. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I really did. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers over my head like a kid scared of the dark, and forced my eyes shut. But every time I started to drift off, I felt it. That same pressure in the air, that same heavy presence, like something was just beyond my vision, waiting. Every sound set me on edge. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the old pipes in the walls, the occasional groan of the wind against the windows. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Not standing at the window, but closer, right outside my door. Faceless, waiting. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was stress, lack of sleep, a bad dream that lingered too long after waking. But I knew better. Something had changed in the building, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted but unwilling to stay inside any longer. I needed fresh air, sunlight, something to make me feel normal again. When I stepped in the hallway, I froze. For the first time since I'd moved in, the window at the end of the hall was clean. The layer of grime that had coated it for months was gone. The glass now clear enough to let in bright morning light. It should have made the hallway feel warmer, more inviting. Instead, it only made me feel worse. Because the man was gone, or at least he wasn't standing at the window anymore. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. My own footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the silence as I made my way toward the elevator. But just as I reached it, I noticed something else. Apartment 6F, the one closest to the window, had its door cracked open, just barely. I had never met the person who lived there. In fact, I wasn't even sure anyone lived there. I had never seen anyone go in or out. No sounds ever came from inside. It was like an empty shell, a forgotten part of the building. But now, the door was open, and I could see something inside. A shadow, a shape, just barely visible through the gap. I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a long moment, nothing moved. The hallway was dead silent. Then, slowly, too slowly, the door creaked shut. I left. I practically ran to the elevator, my skin crawling. Down in the lobby, I saw the building's superintendent, Frank, an old man with a permanent frown and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much. He was arguing with someone, a short, wiry woman I'd never seen before. "I told you, I don't know what you're talking about," Frank was saying, rubbing his temples. "Ain't nobody in that apartment." The woman scoffed. That's bullshit. I hear him in there every night. I slow my steps, suddenly interested. I hear him walking around, moving things, the woman continued. Sometimes I hear him talking, but whenever I knock, silence. Whenever I ask you about it, you say nobody lives there. Because nobody does, Frank snapped. Ain't been rented out in years. The woman glared at him, then stormed off. Frank sighed, rubbing his face before noticing me staring. What? He grumbled. I hesitated. I wanted to ask him about the man, about apartment 6F, about what the woman had said. But I didn't, because something in Frank's expression told me I wouldn't like the answer. That evening, I tried to convince myself that things were normal. I ordered takeout, watched TV, avoided looking at the peephole on my door. But as the night stretched on, the feeling returned. That heavy, suffocating presence. And then a sound. I sat up, heart pounding. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe from another apartment. But then I heard it again. A faint, rhythmic tapping. From inside the walls. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just the pipes. Old buildings make noises. It was normal. It was tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. Not like the random creaks of a settling building. It was a pattern, a signal. I turned up the TV, tried to ignore it, but then a whisper, just beneath the sound of the dialogue on the screen, just on the edge of hearing a voice. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was muffled, distant, as if it were coming from inside the walls. And it was saying my name, not loudly, not angrily, just a soft, quiet whisper, like a breath against my ear. I bolted from the couch, every muscle in my body screaming at me to get out. But my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. The whispering continued, soft, insistent, calling me. And then, just when I thought I would lose my mind, silence. A long, aching silence. Then a knock. Not my door. At my closet. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just stared at the door, my body locked in place. Another knock. Slow. Measured. I didn't want to look. Didn't want to see. But my eyes moved anyway. And in the thin gap beneath the closet door, I saw them. Fingers. Pale. Motionless. Just barely visible in the darkness. Waiting. I ran. I don't remember unlocking my apartment door. I don't remember sprinting down the hall. All I remember is bursting into the stairwell, nearly tripping over my own feet, my heart slamming against my ribs. I kept running, down the stairs, through the lobby, into the street. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, hunched over on the sidewalk, gasping for breath. And then, as I stood there, hands on my knees, lungs burning, I felt it. That presence. Not in the building. Not in the hallway. Behind me. I turned, slowly, heart hammering. And there, just a few feet away, standing beneath the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp, was him. The stranger from the hall. Faceless. Motionless. Waiting. For me. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at him. The faceless figure beneath the street lamp. Motionless. Silent. Watching me. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to move, to get as far away as possible. But I couldn't, because I knew something. If I ran, he would follow. The thought rooted me in place, my breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. The city was alive around me. Cars passing in the distance, the hum of street lights, the occasional voice or distant siren, but none of it mattered. It was just me and him, or it, because whatever was standing under that light wasn't human. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. What do I do? Do I run? Do I confront it? What does it want? As if in answer, the figure moved. Not a step, not a shift, just a sudden, unnatural jerk, as if it had been yanked forward by an invisible string. A sound tore from my throat, a strangled, half-choked gasp, and suddenly I was moving, not running, walking, slow, cautious steps backward, my eyes locked on the thing in front of me. My body was rigid, muscles coiled like a trapped animal, my instincts screaming at me to bolt. But I didn't, because something told me that if I turned my back, if I let out of my sight, it would be closer when I looked again. My foot hit the curb. My balance wavered. I fought to steady myself. And then the streetlight flickered. For half a second, everything was dark. And when the light came back, it was gone. I let out a sharp, shaking breath. My head whipped left, right, scanning the street. Gone. Vanished. But I wasn't stupid. It wasn't gone. It was just somewhere else. Watching. Waiting. For the first time in my life, I wished I weren't alone. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I couldn't. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, one of those places where the sheets smelled like cigarette smoke and the vending machine in the hallway was older than I was. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I paid in cash. I didn't care. I just needed a door with a lock. I bolted at the second I stepped inside my room, shoved the chair under the doorknob for good measure, and sat on the bed, my back against the wall. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't check my phone, didn't close my eyes. I just sat there, waiting, listening. The hum of the motel's ancient AC unit, the occasional footsteps from the room above me, the distant murmur of cars on the highway. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but then something else. A whisper. No, not here, not here. I stiffened, my pulse hammering. It was faint, soft, like a breath against my ear. I turned my head slowly. The motel room had one window, dirty, yellowed curtains drawn shut. But there was a gap between them, just a sliver. And through that gap, I saw something move. Not a person, not an animal, just a shape, pale, motionless, standing outside my window. It found me. I shot off the bed, heart slamming against my ribs. My first instinct was to turn off the light, but I stopped myself, because if the light went out, I might see something I didn't want to. Instead, I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers and did the only thing I could think of. I called Frank. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. I was about to hang up when there was a click. A deep, tired voice. Yeah. I swallowed hard. Frank, it's me. A pause. Then, kid, what the hell? Do you know what time it is? I glanced at the clock on the motel nightstand. 2:17 a.m. I didn't care. There's something in the building. I whispered. Something wrong. Silence. And then, where are you? I hesitated. Not at the apartment. Good. That stopped me cold. Good. Not what you talking about. Not your being ridiculous. Just good. Frank knew. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. You've seen it, I said. Haven't you? A long exhale. Then go home, kid. What? Go home. Lock your door. Don't talk to it. Don't let it know you see it. The line went dead. I didn't go home that night. I stayed in the motel, barely blinking, barely breathing, until the first rays of morning light slipped through the dirty curtains. Only then did I move. Only then did I go back. The apartment building was the same as always, old, peeling, dimly lit. The hallway smelled like dust and something stale. The window at the end of the hall was still clean, letting in pale morning light. And the door to 6F was open. Not cracked, wide open. I stopped. The last time I'd seen it open, there had been something inside. Now I could see more. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no lights, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. Just bare wooden floors and walls stained with something dark. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. And that's when I saw it. Something carved into the doorframe. Tiny, faint, but unmistakable. A single word. Run. A chill rolled through me. I turned, and the hallway wasn't empty anymore. At the far end, a shape. Faceless, motionless, waiting, watching. For me. I should have run. The word was right there, carved into the doorway of 6F. Run. I should have listened. Instead, I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The figure at the end of the hallway didn't move. It never moved, at least, not in the way it should. No slow steps, no shifting weight. Just those horrible, unnatural jerks, like something pulling a marionette strings. And yet, I could feel it coming closer. I turned, finally, and bolted. Not toward the elevator. Not toward the stairs. Toward Frank. He knew something, and I needed to know, too. Frank lived in the basement. Not in one of the normal apartments. He had a small maintenance room, stuffed with tools and half-broken furniture. I had never been inside before, but when I pounded on his door, I heard the heavy scrape of a lock being undone. He opened the door a crack, saw my face, and sighed. Shit, he muttered. He didn't even ask what was wrong. Just pulled the door open and stepped aside. I rushed inside. He slammed the door behind me, bolting it tight. The room was cramped and smelled like cigarettes. A dim, buzzing light bulb swayed overhead. Frank rubbed his temples, looking like he regretted every life choice that had led to this moment. You saw it, he said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. My throat was dry. It followed me. Frank muttered another curse under his breath. I swallowed hard. What is it? For a long time, he didn't answer. He just pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one with shaking fingers, and took a slow drag. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. It's been here a long time, he said. Longer than me. Longer than any of us. I stared at him. What do you mean? Frank exhaled smoke. This building's old. Real old. And bad things. They leave stains. Even when the people are gone, some things stay. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know. But I had to. What happened in 6F? Frank's eyes flicked up to mine. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. There was a man, he said. Lived there alone. Kept to himself. People said he was strange. My stomach tightened. What kind of strange? Frank's jaw tightened. He used to talk to someone who wasn't there. I swallowed. Frank continued. One night, people heard him screaming. By the time anyone got inside, he was already dead. Slashed his own throat. A chill crawled up my spine. They found something carved into the walls, Frank muttered. A word. Over and over. My mouth was dry. Run. Frank nodded. Silence stretched between us. The dim light overhead flickered. I took a slow, shaking breath. Frank. He looked at me. It's in my apartment. Frank closed his eyes. He looked exhausted, defeated. You can't stay here, he muttered. Not anymore. I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't even go back to the motel. I just left, got in my car, started driving, and didn't stop until I was halfway across the city. I found another cheap motel, checked in, and locked myself in the room. I didn't sleep, didn't close my eyes. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting. And then my phone rang. I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs. My hands were shaking as I pulled it from my pocket. No caller ID. I stared at it, pulse hammering. Don't answer. But my thumb moved before I could stop it. I lifted the phone to my ear and heard my own voice. Where did you go? The blood in my veins turned to ice. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't an echo. It was me, speaking, but I wasn't the one saying the words. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then, click, the line went dead, and outside, through the thin motel curtains, a shadow, standing beneath the flickering street lamp, waiting, watching, for me. I left the motel at dawn. I drove, didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get away. But when I finally stopped, when I finally found a new place, a different motel, somewhere farther, I opened the bathroom mirror. And behind my reflection, it was there. Not a shadow, not a figure. Me, smiling. I slammed the mirror shut. My reflection was normal again. No smile, no wrongness, just me. But I knew what I saw. I backed away from the sink, hands shaking, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. My stomach was twisted into a tight, nauseating knot, my skin cold with sweat. It wasn't just following me anymore. It was wearing me. My head was spinning, my thoughts colliding into each other, but one thing cut through the chaos. I had to go back. Back to the apartment. Back to 6F. Because this wasn't going to stop. Not unless I faced it. The building was wrong when I returned. I don't know how else to describe it. The air felt heavier. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, like the walls had shifted while I was gone. The dim light flickered, buzzing softly. The window at the end of the hall was dark. The door to 6F was wide open. I hesitated. Something in my bones screamed, "Don't go in," but I stepped forward anyway. The air inside was stale, cold. The apartment was empty, just like before. Bare wooden floors, walls stripped of paint. The only thing left was the door frame, the one with the word "run" carved into it. I swallowed hard. What do you want? The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. Then a sound, a whisper. You. I turned and saw myself standing in the doorway, smiling. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing in the doorway was me, but it wasn't. It was wrong. The smile stretched too wide. The eyes were too dark. And the way it stood, too still, too unnatural, like a mannequin waiting for someone to move it. Then it tilted its head. A perfect imitation of how I did it when I was confused. Where did you go? It whispered. My own voice. The same words it had said on the phone. My stomach twisted into a tight, sick knot. I took a slow step backward. It took a step forward. Perfectly in sync. My blood turned to ice. This thing wearing my face was copying me, learning me, becoming me. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to speak. You're not me. It just smiled wider. A sick, stretching curve that wasn't human anymore. Then it jerked forward. Not a step, not a shift, just a sudden, unnatural lurch, like something had yanked it closer. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. It took another step, then another. Faster now. It was coming for me. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. Don't remember the hallways, the doors, the stairs. Just running. Running until I reached the basement. I slammed into Frank's door, pounding my fists against it. Nothing. Frank! I gasped. Frank, please. The door creaked open. Frank stood there, eyes dark, face pale. He looked afraid. You went back, he muttered. I swallowed hard. Frank, I saw it. It looks like me. Frank grabbed my arm. Hard. Listen to me, he hissed. It's trying to replace you. A chill crawled up my spine. Frank's grip tightened. His voice dropped lower. You have to prove you're real. I stared at him. What? Frank's face was grim. If you see it again, he whispered, ask it a question. What kind of question? I whispered back. Frank swallowed. Something only you would know. Something it can't steal. I nodded, my pulse hammering. Then Frank let go. And when I looked back, I saw something behind me. Me, standing at the top of the stairs. Watching. Waiting. For me to make a mistake. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove. I don't know how long. Hours. Maybe days. But when I finally stopped, it was there. Standing outside my motel window. Waiting. For me. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. What's my mother's name? Silence. Then it smiled. Not a hesitation. Not a flicker of confusion. Just a slow, stretching grin. And in my voice it whispered, You don't have one. The air turned ice cold. And I knew. It had already taken her. I don't remember what happened next. Everything is a blur. I ran. I kept running. But I knew, deep in my bones, it was too late. I'd already lost. Because the next time I looked into the mirror, I wasn't sure if I was still me. Or if I was the copy.